Well, it's been a big week for AMD, and now everyone's wondering if they are the real deal. They're wondering that because if they are, they have a gigantic opportunity ahead of them. Let's find out if they are.
I think that AMD time is here. Let me explain. So if you think about the latest conversation, which is OpenAI truly going to be able to fulfill these commitments? It's actually the erroneous question to be asking here, because AI is going to be much bigger than OpenAI. So if you look at AI at the moment, it's only like a very small percentage of companies in the US that have started to embrace it. It's only a very small percentage of consumers that are truly using it to a fraction of its potential. So this thing is actually going to get much, much bigger. So if you sort of zoom out, you have two components to the equation here as always, which is really what is AMD's technology and what does it enable them to do? AMD is the machine that prints personalized chips at a marginal cost and offers a total cost of ownership for customers across a growing variety of specialized workloads. So what does that mean? This is primarily enabled by the chiplet platform. This platform is what enabled AMD originally to disrupt Intel. It's what's now enabling AMD to become a crown jewel of the AI compute space. Chiplets basically enable AMD to mix and match compute engines at will, including memory and stuff, which I don't know if you would call exactly a compute engine, but that enables them to make chips which are highly specific and highly specialized for given workloads. And that's why they're actually cheaper and more efficient to run for customers. So what we've seen over the past year or two with Meta deciding to run all of Llama 405B's inference on the MI300 or the MI350, I'm not sure which one it was, Oracle leaning in hard into AMD, now OpenAI leaning in hard. It's because of this tactical decision that AMD took to modify their chips and add more memory than anyone else in the marketplace. More memory means they can fit the entire model basically on chip. And so the distance electrons have to go between the memory and the actual computer shorter because you don't have to go and retrieve the model from some other distant memory. It's on chip. And so the inferences are faster. But as I was saying in my last video, training is actually requires making inferences too. So that is kind of coming full circle. I think that at some point, some analysts were saying, well, I think AMD has a strategic advantage in inference. It's actually tactical because they decided to add more memory. And if you take a step back, what that showcases is AMD's ability to pounce on workloads by modifying compute engines within the chip at will, sort of mixing and matching them at will and at a marginal cost in order to pounce on those workloads and just offer a total cost of ownership advantage. So if you zoom back, inference is going to be massive, but then inference is going to be distributed too. It's going to happen at the edge in small devices. And even if you think about distribution in terms of data centers, well, some data centers are going to be massive, but other companies like Oracle will basically want to distribute the inference in data centers too. So maybe have smaller data centers that are physically close to where the actual inference for end consumers is going to happen. So distribution is going to be quite fractal, and it's not only going to happen at the very edge, it's going to happen all the way from you would say the core clusters of compute, like the actual big data centers to the very edge, and it's going to be highly distributed. So I think AMD is just so well suited to capitalize on distributed inference. It's going to be a massive opportunity. Of course, so long as AI scaling laws persist, which is not guaranteed, but for now it's doing very well. So if you zoom back further, again, this to me the bullishness here has something to do with the recent OpenAI news, but actually it's just a broader macro thesis, which is AI is automating intelligence. It's enabling companies to get more efficient and create more value for end consumers, which is truly what's important. And so AMD's chiplet platform enables them to print personalized chips at a marginal cost. So say in the abstract, here's what I think is going to happen. Over the next 5 years, I think we're going to see some kind of new AI compute workload emerge. A few years ago, no one was really thinking about inference. Now it's all the rage about inference. I think that as the agentic economy takes shape and agents start talking to each other, we're going to see new compute workloads which are going to require specific hardware configurations. And I think we're going to see AMD pounce on that workload and take most of it. The first instance of that I think we're going to see, and it's not technically a new compute workload, but it is a fairly new configuration, is AI at the edge. I think that's going to be massive. I think physical AI is going to be one of the primary end markets for AI, and I think AMD is going to be a primary player there, regardless of whether OpenAI has the money or not to pay for these things. The thing with what's happening with the deals that OpenAI is doing, which seems somewhat incestuous, and I have to say that to me it was also a little bit strange, is that the scale of what's coming right now I think is inconceivable. And I think we need our industrial titans to really work together to make this happen. The OpenAI thing is big news, but to me, the Oracle one was perhaps even bigger. Right? So we saw the backlog of Oracle rise very quickly, and that was also driven by OpenAI. But basically, if you watch this podcast that I singled out, I think it was a few weeks ago, between Mark Papermaster and this gentleman from Oracle, they were really they were talking about distributed inference, and that's really the big opportunity right now in the near term for AMD. It's not just the commitment from OpenAI. If you sort of pause the AI revolution now, the technology we have already is enough to make companies worldwide considerably more efficient, say 50% more efficient, just to be conservative. And so the capex we are seeing being deployed now by hyperscalers is sort of a primer of this industry. A lot of the capex that's going to be directed towards this thing hasn't been directed just yet.
So I must admit, things have been looking rather good recently for AMD. Hans, I know you've been looking into them a lot recently, partly because I keep asking you questions on them, but how well do you think AMD is positioned for the next 5 years? Depending on what reports you get, Nvidia currently has a 90%, some reports say as high as 98% market share at the moment. AMD's had a big focus on inference, memory, and deploying their chiplet architecture. Do you think this gives them a good platform to push off of and to take substantial market share off of Nvidia?
Well, honestly, I think it's kind of a silly way to frame the question, but we'll come back to that. Even if I accepted the framing, I think that 90% plus number sounds absolutely ridiculous. I mean, right now, every single hyperscaler minus Oracle is building out their own custom silicon and deploying it aggressively within their own cloud infrastructure. And Google just announced that they processed over 1.3 quadrillion tokens last month alone. Almost all of that was done exclusively using their in-house TPU silicon architecture. So it seems a bit silly to think that NVIDIA has this market cornered by 90% plus in any way, shape, or form. I mean, sure, they are one of the biggest pure play stock winners in this race, and they're especially dominant in training outside of Google, but there is extremely stiff competition here, especially in inference, which over time will be a workload that's at least 10, if not 100 times bigger than training. And for the most part, that market is completely up for grabs, and the majority of the demand for those inference chips over the next 10 years is going to be incremental add above and beyond what we're spending today. And this is where you get to crazy numbers like OpenAI's deal to deploy 10 gigawatts worth of NVIDIA GPUs and then another 6 gigawatts of AMD GPUs just in the next 3 to 5 years. So yes, I would agree that AMD is well positioned to begin increasing their sales, and we have to remember that most of AMD's business today is not AI data center revenue. And so if they're able to execute on significantly expanding their sales in the AI data center segment, then that could drive huge exponential revenue growth that's incremental to what they are already doing in their other core businesses. And there are a number of elements from a hardware perspective that actually put AMD in a very good position to be able to succeed extremely well in inference, both in the cloud and at the edge. As Antonio mentioned, AMD's reliance on a chiplet architecture as opposed to using larger monolithic chips gives them a lot more granular control over the architecture of their chips. And in theory, this granular control gives them a better ability to actually optimize the architecture of the chip for efficiency and total cost of ownership. And this seems to be one of the reasons why OpenAI actually has gone ahead and started to use AMD GPUs, where they're already seeing that the MI300 and MI355 chips have significant advantages for specific memory-intensive workloads. And then the MI450 chips that they're going to be deploying at least 1 gigawatt of are expected to actually be extremely good at a number of inference tasks for OpenAI. And over time, this advantage in the chiplet architecture could also extend to smaller form factors like edge devices deployed in cars, robots, or other smart devices as well. But beyond chiplets, they're also deeply invested in FPGAs, which stands for Field Programmable Gate Arrays. And these are chips where you can actually modify the logic flow of the hardware specifically, which makes them kind of an interesting Swiss Army knife type chip that could be a great fit for applications where the form factor is small or the power envelope is limited and you need to run dynamic optimized workloads, which isn't really a market that we've seen hit the mainstream yet, but it is also something that's possible on the horizon. But with all of that said, software for AMD is still a huge challenge. As I've mentioned in some of the other episodes, right now the CUDA ecosystem is definitely the most mature ecosystem for people who are developing AI software of almost any kind. In the realm of AI software, CUDA is basically the iOS, whereas ROCm, which is AMD's competitor to CUDA, is kind of like Android, but it's still way behind. It's not really like the iOS of today competing with the Android of today. It's more like the iOS of today competing against Android from 6 or 7 or even 8 years ago. There's just a lot more developer time and energy that needs to go into ROCm in order for it to be able to support anywhere near the width and breadth and depth of AI applications that CUDA is currently already optimized for. But now that we've actually looked at answers to that question kind of through the lens of market share, I really want to zoom out and focus on the larger meta trend that is really driving the overall success of this entire sector. Because I think this is something that most people just aren't aware of and completely underestimate. There was an interesting study that was done recently that showed that demand for compute driven by AI over the last few years is compounding at 4.5 times every year. And traditionally, Moore's Law can only supply us with about 2 times growth every 2 years. And so right now, demand for AI compute is growing 3.2 times faster every single year than Moore's Law can supply. And it's this huge and exponentially growing gap that is actually creating this market demand that allows all of these companies who can execute to succeed beyond their wildest imaginations. This is definitely a rising tide that lifts all boat for any good, competent semiconductor company that's able to participate somewhere in the value chain of these AI chips. And it means that we need the NVIDIAs, the AMDs, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Cerebroses, and the Groks to all make as many chips as humanly possible. Because the number of problems that we actually want to be able to solve with AI, that AI is actually able to solve, just continues to explode, and we will use any and every bit of useful compute that we can get.
The future is AI agents, machine-to-machine AI interactions. For example, Palantir helps companies set up digital twins. They've recently had a patent approved which allows digital twins of 2 companies to talk to each other. So for example, you could have a supply chain where company A's digital twin is able to talk to company B's digital twin to help improve decision-making and streamline operations. How do you think this is going to impact total workloads, and what type of workloads do you think they're going to be? Antonio is very bullish on AMD. He thinks they are perfectly set up to dominate and take a lot of market share in this segment. Do you agree with Antonio's thesis there?
Well, as far as the workloads that come out of Palantir's ability to connect companies together, that's really, I think, primarily going to be CPU-driven workloads with some more AI-driven workloads attached to it. But yeah, primarily going to be CPU. And the reason that I say that is because that's really just the nature of what Palantir's Foundry and AIP software is overall. It's mostly a framework and operating system, and then guardrails around data that moves around from place to place within an organization. And almost all of that is done with traditional CPU-based computing, and this is really born out of the origin of Palantir, which started out as a company that's been around since the early 2000s and been serving major customers both in the enterprise and in the government since well before AI software really even became a thing. And so the majority of the foundation for how Foundry works and for how AIP works was developed well before neural nets were really a thing. And then the reason why Palantir is such a great AI play is because it's this CPU-based framework of software for Foundry and AIP that actually creates the guardrails that AI agents can then go and operate inside of, but then it contains them and it makes them a lot more predictable and actually is capable of processing the outputs of these AI systems into high-quality work outputs. And so as we begin to connect one company to another company and allow them to share data back and forth, it's mostly going to be the same type of hyperscale compute infrastructure that you would normally think of between a company like, say, an Amazon and a Google before AI really became a thing. And then on the topic of whether or not I agree with Antonio on his bullishness about AMD's ability to capture the majority of the inference market, I think I'm a strange combination of being more bearish and more bullish than him all in one. And so on the one hand, I would say I'm a little bit more bearish on AMD's ability to capture the whole market, because I believe he's given an insufficient handicap to the lead that NVIDIA has, both in software and in scale, even if AMD might have a slight edge over NVIDIA in some aspects of the actual hardware architecture itself. So between NVIDIA's fearsomeness as a competitor here in the inference space, and then the presence of other competitors like Samsung with Tesla or Grok with a Q, I think that inference is just going to be a difficult workload for any one company to just dominate. But with that said, I also believe that the amount of demand that we're going to have for inference compute far exceeds most people's wildest expectations, which is what I was referencing in my earlier answer. And I think because of the size of that overall market that we're going into, that AMD still has a tremendous opportunity in front of it to basically print cash as long as they can just deliver good solid chips in inference, whether that be in the cloud or for computers that are going to do inference at the edge, both of which can be huge growth markets for AMD without them necessarily needing to take 100% of the market. So basically, if NVIDIA can make good chips, and AMD can make good chips, and Grok can make good chips, and Samsung can make good chips, and Broadcom can make good chips, then they should all be able to expect to basically print cash for the coming 5 to 10 years. But then the reason that AMD is so exciting from an investment perspective is that the market cap of AMD is so much smaller than NVIDIA, and they haven't shown the high growth rates in revenue or profitability that NVIDIA has shown recently. And so if they can start to get some major traction in these new markets, then that has strong potential to accelerate revenue growth that could drive a complete re-rating on the stock. And so I think that's the near to midterm opportunity for AMD that a lot of people are excited about. And that can still be a completely reasonable expectation to have without having to stake out a huge bet that AMD is going to completely dominate the entire space. And so yeah, that's my position. I think for the near term at least, it doesn't look like it's really an either or between NVIDIA and AMD. I think it's actually going to be both, with even room for additional participants beyond them. Before we wrap, I have to say a huge thank you to my co-host David. Besides being a great co-host with a great accent, David has been one of the key figures behind the scenes helping me to grow this channel from 1,000 to over 16,000 subscribers, and to put out regular shows that reach millions of views every year. When he's not moonlighting with me, he usually works with businesses who want to leverage YouTube to grow their online presence, and he's looking to take on more. If you want to get more clients and more brand awareness for your business using YouTube, I definitely recommend him. You can book a free call with him using the link in the description below.